I'm going to be a guitar maker. I said, you mean what by this? I'm going to be a guitar maker. Well, what do you mean by this? I'm going to make a living being a guitar maker. Maybe. Maybe.
Okay, here's a piece of redwood, chunk of redwood tree. See the moss on it? Got some good dirt and stuff on there. I'm using redwood a lot for my tops, the tops of my guitars. And the old growth redwood works really well for that. It's a beautiful wood. Very, very, very resonant, musical. I don't know if you can hear this one, but it's got just a lot of tone to it, a lot of natural kind of music, resonance. And I'm taking these out of stumps that are just in the backyard, my backyard here. And these are, you know, trees that were logged by some company, nearly 100 years ago, in the early days of logging in this area. And they'd left stumps and chunks of trees, and redwood doesn't rot very fast. So I can go out and kind of mine these stumps and find.
We run the whole gamut, from the hobbyists to the professionals to the factories. And we have every kind of wood that they would want. I mean, from the less expensive woods to the very expensive stuff. Another traditional wood for guitar backs and sides, mahogany. This is the genuine mahogany that's been used for, you know, many, many years. This is an African mahogany that's a good substitute and virtually identical.
This is all different pieces of wood. We have tops and backs up here. These thicker blocks are all backs for archtop guitars. A lot of these wedge-shaped pieces you see are top wood, although some of them are in here are maple from Europe. These are split in half and then book matched.
What's that?
Well, if you have a piece of wood and you cut it in half, I'll show you, and you glue it back together, and then you have a pattern, a grain pattern that looks the same on both sides. It's done for a couple reasons. It looks nice. It gives you even pieces of wood on both sides, roughly, as far as stiffness and that sort of thing, and tone. And also because it's difficult to find, often difficult to find pieces of wood wide enough to build a guitar out of one piece.
Yeah, you get tone, and I'm hearing the kind of lowest fundamental tone of the wood now. And I listen for how long it rings, and whether I hear one clear note or some dissonant notes. Then I'll hold it in another place. I usually hold it in the middle here. And I'll hear another note, a higher one, and kind of get a sense of how its high resonance is. And this is a really great piece of wood. I hear a lot of life in it.
Anyone who commits to being an artisan is a tough guy or a tough gal. So these are courageous people. It takes a certain courage. And what's being reborn is the enthusiasm, the interest. But there's an irony. There's an irony here. Although we have a proliferation of makers, right now at this moment, knowledge is being lost.
I think more and more people are doing it. The whole art of building instruments is going through a renaissance, both from a standpoint of small individual builders like myself as well as the factories. There was a time in the United States when the only guitars that were around really for the most part were factory made, and then there was a time when those factories kind of got more into a corporate state of mind and basically started cutting corners to save money and increase their profits. And we saw in the 70s, and mainly in the 70s and leading up to and out of the 70s, where American-made guitars, the quality and craftsmanship kind of declined.
When 18 years ago, when I started this class, guitar making
was in a major slump. You could not give away a handmade guitar. I don't know if the market had been flooded. I don't know if it had to do with the economy, but guitar sales were way down. Particularly handmade guitars were pretty much non-existent. But as I quickly discovered, there was a lot of interest in people wanted to work with their hands and make their own instruments. And when I first started, probably 90% of the people in the class wanted to make classical guitars, and 10% metal string, steel string guitars. And that changed, that started changing about 10 years ago, and then the guitar sales started rising, and then we came into the unplugged era, and now 90% of the people want to make steel string guitars.
My philosophy is a little bit different, which is I believe that each piece of wood and each instrument is really an individual, and I work with that piece of wood and with the customer, you know, to try and make the best thing we can in that instance. And I've found generally that I have pretty good luck in coming up with a sound that the customer really, you know, is what they're looking for.
No, we sold direct. So it was the musicians we knew, their students, their friends, people who heard about us. Some of my favorite customers were the draftsmen who worked for Kaiser, you know, and the forklift salesman. I think those were the most appreciative times. Those are the people who came back and said, Eugene, I can't tell you what this means to me. This is the only beautiful handmade thing in my life.
We're high-end guitars. If you walked into your neighborhood music store, you'd say we're horribly expensive. They go from $3,200 to $5,000. Here in this setting, we're at the low end. And it depends a little with what model. Our classicals are run around $3,500. That's fairly cheap for a handmade classical. The steel strings, some of the makers don't seem to pay themselves, and you can actually get very nice steel strings for a bit less than this one's $3,700. The irony, our most expensive model, our jazz guitar, is ludicrously cheap by wooden standards, because an archtop typically sells for $10,000 or $15,000, and ours goes for $5,000.
All my life I'd always said that one of these days I would build a guitar, and I was really inspired by the Collings. I had bought a few other handmade and vintage guitars. I kind of quickly got bored with collecting and decided that what I really wanted to do was try and build one, so I took a stab at it, and it turned out pretty well.
We paid our bills with it. That's what's remarkable, and that's what was original. We took the leap to become guitar makers. We wanted to do what they did in Spain, $2 a month and pay the rent somehow, and when you can't sell, you do the repair work. We made it. I love this. I'll pass this on to anyone. Warren White taught me how to use the handsaw because I couldn't rip the sides with the handsaw. He said, it's easy. This is the trick. He said, stay on the line and cut straight.
It's easy.
Yeah, and it's true.